person that seemed to influence me the most was Mies van Gogh, who I knew very well. Later, near the end of his life, and after I had my own practice, we collaborated on a project in Montreal. Manzai Ildesur. It wasn't really a collaboration. He did the tall buildings, I did the small buildings, but we had a number of meetings at his office. And in any case, he influenced me irrespective of that. But outside of that, in Chicago, he was, he was at once a very nice man and a tough guy. He was a strong man.
Yes.
And he was very quiet, and very, in other words, stolid. S-T-O-L-I-D. He was very introspective, hermetic, very strong man. He was 35 years old. I was back from Yale for 4 years, 4 years. I was always interested in geometry. I was always interested in mathematics. I painted in a sort of geometric op art sort of way. I was a student of Albers at Yale. All those things conspired to give me an interest in the kind of thing that evolved. And it was Instant City was a sort of, at some level, a revelation to me. I mean, looking at it myself, at the time even, not just now. When the model was photographed, and I saw the photographs, I was blown away, because it really, I recognized that there was something very strong. And in any case, if you look back at the time, in the middle 60s, there was a lot of literature published on megastructures. It was the beginning of the very beginning of that kind of thing. And so Instant City was published quite a lot in various magazines and books, to Hinden's book, Urban Structures for the Future, and so forth. And it was, even as I look back, it was a good structure. It was an interesting concept. I liked it then, and I suppose no. If you design things, then you design.
Yes.
And so it becomes almost like a drug. It becomes a habit. And you need it. You need to design. It becomes a part of you. If you're not designing, you feel somehow incomplete, I think. Because it's what you do, not just for a living. It's you're impelled by it to do everything. You got to design everything. So, I don't have any favorites. But they're all my favorites, not just from first century, but also in the Cinquecento, Seicento, Settecento, Ottocento. And so all these incredible buildings from unimaginably wonderful architects, some of whom you've heard of, some of whom you'll never hear of. It's very influential on me. In other words, the context of the place, from first century through 19th century, inclusive, is an extraordinary city. And it seduced me. It did, no mistake. And it, at some level, really set my career back, because I became subject to the vicissitudes of the place. I had no apologies for it. It was me that did it. But it was destructive. Which is not to say, now, in some ways it was very productive, because it also made me realize that having an overriding single line as an architect is a problem. But the literalness, which I then, in my own work, at some real level pandered to is at some level disruptive experience. It's just the reverse of the American Academy. But the American Academy was more fun. The American Academy was much more stylish. It was much more, at some level, I suppose, even civilized. But the Bangladesh experience, which was obviously then East Pakistan, because I went through the war with him, and actually founded something in America called the Bangladesh Defense League, and raised money for guns for the Bengalis.
Yes.
Against the Pakistanis, the Pathanis, the Punjabis. So, and the only other American, and you were too young to have remembered, but America under Nixon, and particularly under Kissinger, the Bengali phrase for it, maybe, I don't know the Egyptian phrase, but it works its way in Arabic.
Yes.
Used as haramjada, which means son of a bitch. Kissinger was a son of a bitch. He was a real, the Russians at the time called it realpolitik. He was a pragmatist. And he caused the United States to covertly send military aid to Pakistan to suppress the Bengalis. And so the Pakistanis, with the revolution, the uprising in Bengal, tried to decimate the intellectual community and the leadership, to kill them. And in fact, I was there during the war, and I saw they lined them up and shot them in the University of Dhaka's playing field. And I was in an apartment right across the way with a little peephole on pulled shades, looking and seeing them shot. Hell of an experience. Even though I spent 4 years in the Navy, it still was a hell of an experience to see people lined up and shot. And they would go to the old city of Dhaka during the war, and the Pakistani soldiers would pull down the lungi of the Bengali to see if he was circumcised or not. If he was circumcised, he was one religion. If he wasn't, he was another. Muslim Islam is an extraordinary man who was in my master's class at Yale, and who no one yet really knows worldwide. They know him in the subcontinent of Asia, but you probably never heard of him, even though he was terrific. He's a terrific architect, but more, he's not a terrific, he's a good architect. Very good architect, not a terrific architect. But he's a terrific human being who was also head of the Marxist-Leninist Party of Bangladesh. So he was very politically embroiled and was one of the strong forces that caused the revolution to occur. So I went there as an architect. You're also a human being.
Yes.
And so he's sitting in an office in Dhaka with slow-moving ceiling fans at night where he's rabble-rousing in the office. Young people would come and he would say certain things. And he was one of Sheikh Mujibur Rahman, who was the father of Bangladesh. Close allies, and during the war was forced to flee and go to Calcutta. And in fact, I resigned the commissions in Calcutta at a press conference in September of '71. And only Teddy Kennedy was the only other American who came out for the Bengalis. All the other Americans, there was some literature. So, you say architecture. See, I'm not so interested in architecture in the conventional sense. It doesn't interest me, neither then nor now. And a lot of it came from Mr. Muslim Islam, who basically gave up architecture to find something that he could do to help his people at some level. And in some level, you may come to it, I don't know, but I'm doing this new school in Chicago, ArchiWorks. I never really thought about it before, but probably some of it comes from Muslim Islam, which is to say, although I never really thought about it that way, because architecture conventionally, I don't know in Canada, and frankly I don't much care. I mean, it's enough in Chicago. I don't even care about Toledo, let alone Toronto. It's not interesting. So I have enough in Chicago to try and make sense out of the needs of people at some real level. So the Bengali experience was great.
Yes.
I mean, doing the buildings was very important, make no mistake. But he wasn't just the buildings. He was developing a master plan which had never been done in the country, about the microclimatology, the geology, the whole condition, the behavioralistic conditions, everything in Bangladesh that one could then build from as an architect. It had never been done. We did a huge document, which in many ways is more important than buildings. Buildings are okay.
Yes.
And I'm not unhappy with it. So that was a very important experience. I don't care what they're. If they're anything, there's 6, because I'm not a part of it. I have no interest in it.
Okay.
I mean, we came together to do an exhibition in 1975, and then in 76. First at Cooper Union in New York, and then in Chicago. We were all very young. I was among the oldest. I wasn't the oldest, but I was among the oldest. Of the 7, there were 2 that were older than me, and the others were somewhat younger. And we were trying to find a way into, I think, the power structure in Chicago, which is basically entirely run by Miesian descendants. So we did this exhibition, which was quite an interesting exhibition. And then we founded something called the Chicago Architectural Club, which is also totally boring to me, which I've long since quit. I don't even know. 10 years ago. I'm not involved in them. I have no interest in them. I think that they, certain people stay. How do I say this? Certain things happen in life at a particular time. And some of the people that happens to move on. And others look still to that time for inspiration. Say the descendants, the Miesians, not Mies was fabulous, but there's ridiculous psychophantic descendants. Their life is rooted in a dead man. I mean, I know an architect in Cincinnati, a totally worthless educator and architect named David Nyland. I hope it gets into print, okay? Whose life entirely, the apogee of it, was his teacher, Paul Rudolph. Nothing has happened in his life worth anything since then. Nothing. Other people move on. I hate to say it so cruelly, okay? So 6 of the Chicago 7 are still involved in the Chicago 7. I mean, there were 80, I think. It was a large number. It was an immense response. It was also about 1980.
Yes.
And it also fomented the Chicago Architectural Club, and 3 of us co-curated it, one of whom was totally intellectually dishonest, one of the Chicago 7, Stuart Cohen, who I actually do not even speak to. But the exhibition was extraordinary.
Yes.
In the sense that the people who contributed to it really went all out. And by the way, from all over, Hans Tupker from Amsterdam.
Yeah.
There were all kinds of fun. Gaetano Pesce did a really good thing in that he didn't try to establish an ideology. What he did was it was open totally, and you could do what you want. So he just picked 22 people. Or he picked 11, and I think whoever it was in Italy picked the other 11. Maybe Portuguese and Bob Stern. Bob's a very good friend of mine, make no mistake. Had a line, had an ideology that they wanted to pursue. So they picked certain architects who they felt could deliver that line. I was one. But it then, and then they did something very strange. They established a 2-tier hierarchy that whatever, I forget the number, Hans Hollein, whoever we all were, were on the main line. And then upstairs, in that thing in Venice, there were younger architects. They established a kind of descendancy. The first one, the 11 Americans, were very different one from the other. There was Venturi and Pelli and Eisman and me and Gary and Moore. No, I don't know Moore. I don't remember. And Stern and Meyer and Gray. As you get older, you become somewhat forgiving of these kinds of things because in the end they're not very important, actually. the project isn't important. It's the friendship that actually transcends. Then something else happened in starting this school, archaeology. Bob, along with all of my other friends, in the beginning and as recently as a month ago, support archaeologists. Continue to, in other words, we support each other. So yes, he's egocentric, insatiable, wants every possible project. Is it his best character trait? No. But am I God? Am I supposed to judge him? No.
Yeah.
So, what am I?
Well, that's fair.
You know, in the words in Bangladesh, the Bengalis sit around and with this hand expression say, "That I did it for." You know, when people come to you, you don't know. Maybe that couple over there comes to you to do a house. What do you know about them? I mean, at some level. You may get to know some things. This guy comes to me with his wife. He's, at the time, I don't know, 60-something, I suppose. He had a, what do you call those, where you have to urinate into me, and he wants me to design a house, which is very unusual, because designing a house is slightly more optimistic.
Yes.
If you know you're going to die, I mean, you may travel around the world, you may go out and get laid with everybody out there, whatever your fantasies are, but it's unlikely that you're going to build a house. This guy wanted to build a house. He's a very strange guy. Vulgar, crude. It turned out he owned burlesque houses in, there's this place south of Chicago called Calumet City. I mean, he was a really déclassé, rough guy. And I thought about not doing it. You know. And then you think to yourself, what the hell can you do for some crude guy who's, you know, and he's dying. And he's vulgar. So I decided to design that thing, to make him laugh. I decided to design something to give him in his last moments some pleasure. He loved it. He loved it. And we built it. Not only was it obvious, but I also explained it in detail so that he understood, so there's no mistake.
Yeah.
So I'm saying it's an interesting, it's more to it than meets the eye, so this experience. And it was a great experience because you know the word poignancy. What is poignant? What is deep, sensitive issues? Something that's really moving. When poignancy is built into a building program, in the program, is the best kind of project. In other words, when you have tough issues to face, not just some house for some rich person, or some hotel or restaurant, because they're all bullshit projects. They just, you do what you like, and that's all. But when you're dealing with the blind, and say you're an architect, and sight is so important to an architect. So, I mean, can you imagine yourself blind and still be an architect? Tough. You know what I'm saying? So you become subjective. Now, the actual, blind people, because they're very unhappy, and they have this immense burden, they're more often than not very pleasant. You know, we have out of some sentimentality, some notion that the disabled are really nice people. They're not, because they have terrible burden laid on them, like blindness, or your legs are blown off in the war. How can you be a happy person? So we're working with the users, which I did of my own volition. This was just for the Chicago Public Library, but I insisted on working with the actual user group, the American Federation of Blind. So I met with a lot of blind people, and I got to tell you, it was very unpleasant, because they were angry at their fate in life. You know? So it's a Congress. You know, everything in the United States is determined by law, by actual congressional law. The Congress, how do I say, has determined that there is no such thing as blindness. Everybody has at least a little something you can see. I mean, if you yourself go like this even, you can see color, you can see vague shapes, you know what I mean? Blindness, you still see. Like 95% of them can see something. So what is it that they see? They see primary colors, and they see, and immense light helps them. High volume of light, high number of lumens. The brighter it is, this kind of thing bothers them. That doesn't, because they can memorize it. It's always there.
The permanent
thing. This can be moved. Is very troublesome. So it might be here one day, it might forms, because they take their hand and they follow along. So also fabric or material, or rough versus smooth, fixed versus movable, bright colors versus muted colors, lots of light versus not a lot of light. Those are the things that are meaningful here. So that's what I did. Exterior panels, whatever that, I don't even remember now. Maybe yellow was the structure, red was the exterior panels, and blue was all the ducts and conduit. Everything was exposed, so they could learn about the building. They could trace things, see them. Architecture, conventionally, has its roots in Hellenic Christian tradition. It is based on faith, hierarchy, Platonic attitudes from Plato, belief in beauty, that this is more beautiful than that this measurement, this ratio, like the golden section, is more appropriate to a human dimension than this ratio. And there are books on it. About mythical numerical ratios. George Hersey wrote a fabulous book. Judaism is based on interpretation. It's based on doubt, skepticism. If you read the Torah, Bible, Genesis, Exodus, and then the reiterative stories afterwards, because that's what they are, is about the challenge of God. It's about challenging. It's about exegesis, interpretation, etc., etc., etc. Christianity, the St. James Version of the Bible, the New Testament, is based on faith. Faith in Jesus Christ, faith in life ever after, and so forth. Also in Greek times, it's based on the same. Architecture is based on that. Architecture is generally not subject to skepticism. Postmodernism is about skepticism. Postmodernism, like the Renaissance, introduces dissimulation, doubt. It's a Jewish phenomenon. So it's not that the Jewish architects do it. It's bullshit. It's that intrinsically, theoretically, it challenges hierarchy. It's about doubt. That's a Jewish thing. It's not a Christian Hellenic thing. So therefore it's very different than the traditions of architecture, which are very skeptical. I don't believe in architecture as architecture qua architecture. The autonomy of architecture. I don't believe it. I have. And you see in my work, sometimes it looks like this, then it looks like this. It's everywhere. So that's not good. That's obviously not the work of one of the faithful. People that do that kind of shit are not imbued with faith. Okay. I would say. Of all the publishing in the world, and most of the money. Chicago is about the Baptist fundamentalist center of the United States. It's about faith. It's about blue-collar workers. It's not about intellectualism. It's about work, and it's about the history of modern architecture was written in Chicago. Of course. Straight. So this, for me, that's the big school from a laissez-faire attitude subscribed to by a third-rate faculty because it gave them a chance to do anything they wanted, which meant nothing. To a highly theoretically charged school. And I brought in a lot of very, very good theoreticians who now basically, except for one, have all gone. So it became a very good school. It became a player amongst schools. Changed not just the computer per se, the ease that you can crank out working drawings or use Mac and Macs for graphics. I think it's way more than that. It's changed our sensitivity to understanding architecture. And in some ways, it's not good, and in some ways, it's terrific, because it's made architecture actually change. Architecture is now no longer a single discipline. It's a multidisciplinary field. And a lot of that comes from, it's true that most architects either can use CAD or they can draw. They basically can't do both. Because they're trained in one way or the other, predominantly. Or they opt to be trained in one way or another. You know? So that architecture is interesting in that light, insofar as there's a new romanticism, which gives you a chance for new perceptions about design that you could not have done before. And so the computer will actually change buildings. I like when I came up for that other lecture at the Design Exchange. First of all, I like Toronto a lot. I always have. It's not because I'm here. So I'm not saying it gratuitously. I really do like it. It is a great architectural community. The U of T is a good school. Waterloo's a good school, etc. I love Mises Toronto Dominion Center. I think it's spectacular. Absolutely spectacular. The Design Exchange is very good. Howard is doing a good job because it's multidisciplinary. It's very interesting, in my view. I think the new that mall done by, I think it's got an architectural culture. There's the presence of an architectural culture. So, because I think Helmut Jahn is a very brave man. And I know it has problems. But, you know, they say that like a body, a building begins to die when it's born.
When it's what?
Born.
Okay.
And so the State of Illinois building leaks like anything, but so did the Parthenon.
You like the mass, the fine outside mass of that building?
No. At some level, I don't like the building. But what I like about it is the courage of its author to try and invent a new paradigm for a state building. That's interesting. It's a courageous act. You may say it's foolhardy. I would say it's courageous. I would say courageous. I remember seeing the building. I think Graves is a wonderfully talented architect. I mean, wonderfully talented. Big time. And I think that he did things at the beginning of so-called postmodernism that were very, very, very exciting. Extremely. And I continue to look at his work with amazement because he's an extremely talented architect, an extremely talented designer. His own house is extraordinary. And he's a very good friend. The best way to describe the relationship in architecture, some time ago, there was an attempted robbery in our office at night. We have a glass door, and somebody tried to get in, and they couldn't get in, but they scratched the door. So we have a logo, the name on the door, Tigerman McCurry, and there's some sort of logo, which is the European Guild symbol for architect. So we had to put a new piece of glass, and we had to do all that, right? So I changed it to Tigerman or McCurry, collaborator, co-founder, a woman designer named Eva Maddox, an interior designer. The two of us did this together. We've known each other for a quarter century, very old friends. And so when I say I, I'm really saying we. So I want to make that clear, number one. When we did this thing, I mean, then I can say I. But for me, it's the most important thing I've ever done. There's no question. Building, teaching, whatever else I've done. Because it has the possibility of moving into another dimension, both in education and practice. It's the seam between one thing and another, between the academy and practice. It's about morality and ethics. It is about social cause. It has a social agenda. It's very important. It's the integration of design with social cause. Not the social engineering of the late 60s at all. But it's about trying to do the best designs and to strategically implement them to cause them to be delivered, a delivery system for the homeless, the disabled, the elderly, and blah, 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 all that. So, and it's multidisciplinary. It's not a school, it's a 1 year or more internship. And it's based on project teams. And I'm going to show today certain projects that are, as they're evolving. It's only a year and a half old. The first year we had 10 students, this year we have 12. It's great. It's very challenging. It's very hard. It's very different. It's not an architecture school. There's no tenure, there's no prerequisites. And in any case, it's not about teaching anybody anything. It's about trying to deliver things and get them out into society. I stand behind every single thing I've done. That doesn't mean I think they're equivalently wonderful or that they're terrible. But I am responsible. I am a responsible type as a person. I like responsibility. I don't turn away from it out of fear of, say, litigation. But this focus at the second on deconstruction. Do you know what Kabbalah is? Kabbalah is Jewish mysticism. And in Kabbalistic thought, they have a relook at creation, described in Genesis. And there are three parts to it. One is called, in Hebrew, Zimzum, which means construction, which is the stepping back of the divine being into which the humankind steps in and makes decisions for itself. The second part is called Shvirat HaKelim in Hebrew, and in English means an apocalyptic version of creation, the breaking of the vessels, deconstruction. And the third one in Hebrew is called Tikkun, which means in English an attempt at reconstruction, trying to put things back together. I see it as a failed attempt at healing an irreparable wound, which is the name of my next book. And so I'm not, architecture is intrinsically optimistic as a construct, construction. You have to be optimistic. But it doesn't take into account disjunction or all of the problems that beset us at any generation. Deconstruction is fabulous because it does have within it the potential of accommodating or reflecting disjunction. But it's not optimistic. It's like ripping off your skin, creating new pain, fresh blood. So tikkun, the failed attempt at healing the irreparable wound, you have to try. You can never do it, but you have to try because architecture is optimistic. That's where I'm at, and that's where Archie works. In other words, it's about morality and ethics, just not to be anymore. I know I'm not interested in them. I'm not interested in commenting on them. I think that they are fixed in place and in time and can only reflect. They can never, of themselves, the academy can never evolve a new way. It can only reflect the times, and that's always been the case. The convention of the academy, or if you like, architecture education, I don't find very amusing. I don't find very interesting at all. Okay? All of architecture is a longer view. And sometimes there's a recession, and sometimes there's inflation, it's like this. And you go through it. You find your way through it. It's not very interesting. Many years ago, 1957, Frank Lloyd Wright was interviewed 2 years before his death on television by Hugh Downs, who's still alive. The guy, I think, on CBS or whatever, anchor. who's obviously a very old man. And Hugh Downs asked the same thing. He said, Mr. Wright, you invented the prairie style, the corner window, the cantilever, the wing wall, the open plan, the California kitchen, whatever. What is the best project of all of these projects? And Frank Lloyd Wright unhesitatingly said, why, the next one, of course. I give you the same answer. I have no interest in those projects. When it's done, it's not interesting. There is no such thing. Human beings, including me, most surely, are flawed. We're not perfect. I mean, the flaw, which means to say the imperfection, the vulnerability of people, is their most resonant characteristic. They're all imperfect, and therefore they're all perfect, because they're all vulnerable. And they all, whether they believe it or not, are going to die. And that makes them human. And so a client, I don't have such thing as clients. I have people that come to me to build. But a client takes them out of humankind and places them to like a picture. It's a picture, a client, a piece of paper. They're people. And they're all good and bad in varying degrees. Some are worse than others, some are better than others, but they're all people, and you deal with them as peers. That's the problem with deconstruction, postmodernism, international style modernism, whatever is or the Renaissance, and all those things are for architects, the arcane and intelligentsia, cognoscenti. It's a problem. Architecture is intrinsically flawed because it speaks to itself. Except because it's out there, it speaks inadvertently to others. And if it's arcane and esoteric, what it says is, it speaks about elitism. That's the problem. I would say, if there was one thing, if you wanted to say one thing, or you want to say one thing I really believe in, that I've always believed in, is ethics and morality, which is about architecture and isn't.